As you can see, I'm holding Noah. Noah's not. He's a little bit fussy.
Do you have something to say?
Hi.
Happy Mother's Day.
Happy Mother's Day.
Hey everybody, welcome back. You can see she's not with me, but she did leave a message for you today. So, happy Mother's Day to everybody, to all you mothers out there. If you give me a moment, just this is gonna be my own kind of personal privilege since I'm doing this stream. I want to say, first off, happy Mother's Day to my mom. I love you so much. I hope that I am doing a good job as honoring you as a mom in my kind of day-to-day life, and also to, I think, one of the best moms I've ever seen in my life, my wife. She is just proving how amazing of a mom she is right now, especially with trying to handle school, with Ava, trying to have Noah and to make sure he's taken care of, and then sort of keeping track of me and all of my chaos. And so I've never seen someone who is so just clearly an all-star mom as my wife, and I love you so much, and I appreciate you so much. And to all the other moms out there, I've had a lot of people, related, non-related, that have been like moms to me. My grandma, my stepmom, my mother-in-law, just a lot of family friends that have taken care of me over time. So to all of you, thank you so much. And so, if you haven't yet today called your mom, shame on you. Go call right now. You can come back to this. But happy Mother's Day from me to all of you. Today for our devotional, we're gonna do something I haven't done before. We're gonna skip around some chapters. We're supposed to be starting chapter 28, but and if we were just reading all of this real quickly and doing this in like a 20-minute period of reading 4 chapters at a time, we would be doing literally the chapters in order. But what we're going to do is we're going to read literally the first 2 verses of chapter 28, and then we're going to skip to 29 and 30, and we're going to do those two combined. And the reason being is for flow. What's happening now is we're getting to the very end of Samuel. We're going to have a couple chapters where the book's going to jump from David to Saul, David to Saul, David to Saul, David to Saul, and back and forth during the same kind of period of time. And it's going to be really hard, where we're going to be just doing this on a week-to-week basis. It's going to be really hard to understand the flow as we're going back and forth between David and Saul and back. And so we're going to keep with David's story where we left it. And we're going to finish David through a couple chapters. And once we're through that, then we're going to come back and we're going to hit most of chapter 28. We're starting at verse 3. We'll start there, and and then we'll talk about Saul's chapters to finish off the book. So again, we're going to do just in a this is going to sound very jumbled, but bear with me, and I hope it makes sense as we do it. We're going to do chapter 28, and then we're going to do chapter 28 only verses 1 and 2, Then we're going to do 29, and we're going to read all of 29. Then we're going to do all of 30. So that's the order here, just so you know it. So starting at chapter 28, verse 1. In those days the Philistines gathered their forces to fight Israel. Achish said to David, "You must understand that you and your men will accompany me in the army." David said, "You will see for yourself what your servant can do." Achish replied, "Very well, I will make you my bodyguard for life." Now we move to chapter 29. The Philistines gathered all their forces at Aphek, and Israel camped by the spring in Jezreel. As the Philistine rulers marched with their units of hundreds and thousands, David and his men were marching at the rear with Achish. The commanders of the Philistines asked, "What about these Hebrews?" Achish replied, "Is this not David, who was an officer of Saul, king of Israel? He has already been with me for over a year, and from the day he left Saul until now I have found no fault in him." But the Philistine commanders were angry with Achish, saying, "Send the men back, that they may return to the place you assigned him. He must not go with us into battle, or he will turn against us during the fighting. How better could he regain his master's favor than by taking the heads of our own men? Isn't this the David they sang about in their dances? Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands." So Achish called to David and said to him, "As surely as the Lord lives, you have been reliable, and I would be pleased to have you serve with me in the army. From the day you came to me until today, I have found no fault in you, but the rulers don't approve of you. Now turn back and go in peace. Do nothing to displease the Philistine rulers." "But what have I done?" asked David. What have you found against your servant from the day I came to you until now? Why can't I go and fight against the enemies of my lord the king?" Achish said, "I know that you have been pleasing in my eyes as an angel of God. Nevertheless, the Philistine commanders have said, 'You must not go up with us into battle. Now get up early along with your master's servants who have come with you, and leave in the morning as soon as it's light.' So David and his men got up early in the morning to go back to the land of the Philistines, and the Philistines went up to Jezreel." Now we move in to chapter 30. David and his men reached Ziklag, and on the third day. Now the Amalekites had raided the Negev and Ziklag, and they had attacked Ziklag and burned it, and had taken captive the women and everyone else in it, both young and old. They killed none of them, but carried them off as they went on their way. When David and his men reached Ziklag, they found it destroyed by fire, and their wives and sons and daughters taken captive. So David and his men wept aloud until they had no strength left to weep. David's two wives had been captured, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. David was greatly distressed because the men were talking of stoning him. Each one was bitter in spirit because of his sons and daughters. But David found strength in the Lord his God. Then David said to Abiathar the priest, the sons of Ahimelech, "Bring me the ephod." Abiathar brought it to him, and David inquired of the Lord, "Shall I pursue this raiding party? Will I overtake them?" "Pursue them," he said. "You will certainly overtake them and succeed in the rescue." David and the 600 men with him came to the Besor valley, where some stayed behind. 200 of them were too exhausted to cross the valley, but David and the other 400 continued the pursuit. They found an Egyptian in the field and brought him to David. They gave him water to drink and food to eat, part of the cake of pressed figs and 2 cakes of raisins. He ate and was revived, for he had not eaten any food or drunk any water for 3 days and 3 nights. David asked him, "Who do you belong to? Where did you come from?" He said, "I am an Egyptian, the slave of an Amalekite. My master abandoned me when I became ill 3 days ago. We raided the Negev of the Kerethites, some territory belonging to Judah, and the Negev of Caleb, and we burned Ziklag." David asked him, "Can you lead me down to this raiding party?" He answered, "Swear to me before God that you will not kill me or hand me over to my master, and I will take you down to them." He led David down, and there they were, scattered over the countryside, eating, drinking, and reveling because of the great amount of plunder they had taken from the land of the Philistines and from Judah. David fought them from dusk until the evening of the next day, and none of them got away, except for 400 young men who rode off on camels and fled. David recovered everything the Amalekites had taken, including his 2 wives. Nothing was missing, young or old, boy or girl, plunder, or anything else they had taken. David brought everything back. He took all the flocks and herds, and his men drove them ahead of the other livestock, saying, "This is David's plunder." Then David came to the 200 men who had been too exhausted to follow him, and who were left behind at the Besor valley. They came out to meet David and the men with him. As David and his men approached, he asked them how they were. But all the evil men and troublemakers among David's followers said, "Because they did not go out with us, we will not share with them the plunder we recovered. However, each man may take his wife and children and go." David replied, "No, my brothers, you must not do that with what the Lord has given us. He has protected us and delivered into our hands the raiding party that came against us. Who will listen to what you say? The share of the man who stayed with the supplies is to be the same as that of the man who went down to battle. All will share alike." David made this statute an ordinance out of Israel from that day to this. When David reached Ziklag, he sent some of the plunder to the elders of Judah, who were his friends, saying, "Here is a gift for you from the plunder of the Lord's enemies." David sent it to those who were in Bethel, Ramoth, Negev, and Jatir, to those in Aroeo, Sifmoth, Eshtemoa, and Rakal, and those in the towns of the Jerahmeelites and the Kenites, to those in Hormah, Borashan, Athek, and Hebron, and to those in all the other places where he and his men had roamed. And so, a bit long, and so I do apologize for that. We'll get kind of straight to the point here soon. So, if you remember where we were last time, David and his men had fled and went to Philistine, and were actually serving the Philistine king Achish. And what we see here is he had been serving for about a year, and he was really kind of rudderless. He became a raider. He was raiding, and he was actually lying to the king in the process. The new king, he was there. So he was living in Ziklag, living kind of in exile. Saul's content with it because, as we said before, usually when you flee a kingdom, you can't be king later on. Just kind of everything's kind of messed up for David at this point. And now, to make it worse, to really crank the knob to 11, so to speak, we see that the Philistines are getting ready to fight Israel, who David's originally from, and who he was the general of their army for a very long time. And so, and we see him willingly go up with his king to go fight Israel. We don't know how he feels about it. We're not really told, but we do say, but it does note that he's going up, and it actually sounds like he's upset when he has to be turned back. And so what we see here, we don't know why we actually don't know the root of the war. To be quite honest, it wouldn't shock me if in between the lines here, this wasn't the Philistines trying to put David on the throne almost as a client king. That would be really common back in this time, especially if they knew that there was a claim to the throne. As what we see here, they might have been trying to place him on the throne. But what we see here is David and his men go with the army, and they leave their people behind in Ziklag. That is important. And we see that once he gets there, the rest of the Philistines don't trust him. And you can't blame them. There's a really good reason why they shouldn't trust him. It's because he's been really kind of beating up on them for several years. And they know the song. They know the song, Saul has killed his thousand and David his tens of thousands. And unfortunately, the thousand and tens of thousands they were killing were Philistines most of the time. And so we see an issue here where they just don't trust him. Even though he has the trust of their king, the lords that are underneath that king do not have trust in David. They think he's going to turn on them. They know what he can do with a smaller number of people, and he only has 600 with him. And they know that he can do a lot of damage. And so he has to be told, turn back. You're not going to fight with the army. Go back to Ziklag. And so David goes on his way. And it takes him 3 days to get back to Ziklag. We'll go back. We'll talk about the battle of the Philistines later on because that's going to come up more in Saul's story. But he goes back to Ziklag, and it's completely looted. I think it was the Amalekites, if I remember right. The Amalekites come up and they loot, and they plunder, and they take everyone. And likely back in this day, if you take a town like that, you're taking them for slavery. That's what you're taking them for. And so they're likely going to enslave all of these people. And what we hear of a group of people in complete and utter despair. They weep until they can't weep any longer, and they're in such distress, and even David is in such distress that they are talking about stoning David. Just sort of like this: if this is as good a leader you're going to have, and you're going to make us lose all of our people, we're going to stone you. We're done following you. It gets that bad. And we see the story where David says he has faith in the Lord, and they get up and they dust themselves off and they go after him and they start chasing after. We're not told how long they weep. We're not told how long, but it couldn't be too long because they eventually start really chasing the Amalekites with quite a rigor. And eventually we see them come up and actually catch them reveling. They're happy because of the plunder they've looted in Judah. They're happy about the plunder that they've looted from Ziklag and all the other places where they've been raiding. And they're in a very joyous mood. And then David comes up and he annihilates them. And it must be one of these cases where David is outnumbered and still conquers, because we know he had 200 that were too exhausted and rested, and they stay with the baggage, and he only has 400. And what we know is that the way the scripture reads is it says everyone was killed except for 400 who escaped on camel. So the amount of people who escaped were the amount that David was fighting with, which means that most likely the number he conquered was by far greater than what that was. And so we're going to stop there. We're going to talk about kind of what about a big point that's kind of been forming in my mind about this. And I think I really want to talk about how we react to really devastating news. And we all get devastating news at various points in time. We've all had our personal share of issues. Things that have left us distraught, disoriented, with no real direction. And that's certainly where David was at this point with his men when they get back to Ziklag and everyone's been kidnapped, everyone's been taken. And so I think one of the best stories I've ever heard is not a story of mine, and we all could tell our own stories where we had to kind of pick ourselves up and go. But there's a story of a guy from about, I want to say 50 years ago. We're going to just say he's a young man, up and comer. He's a lawyer, DA. He wants to serve in public service. And as a very young man, he runs for Congress with the help of his wife, and he wins. And he's on top of the world. He has two young boys, a young little girl that's no more than about a year old, and a beautiful wife. And he's just won a seat in Congress, and everything's looking up and up. And in the time between when he's elected and he takes the oath of office, in that period of time, in December, near Christmas, um, his wife and his three kids are in a devastating car accident. And it's so devastating that the two boys come out with serious injuries, one with broken legs, the other one with a fractured skull. But even more devastating, his wife and the child, the baby girl, are killed. And from being on the highest of highs to the lowest of lows in a very short period. And the gentleman at the time considered a lot of things. First off, he admits that he talks about suicide, about not how to keep from moving on. How do you move on from this? And he couldn't figure that out. Um, he he talks about not taking the oath and effectively resigning and kind of just sitting in that sorrow of his life. Um, and he struggles with it. Um, and he doesn't know what to do, and he's quite rudderless. And finally, some people, some colleagues come to him and sort of help him to come to terms, or not to terms, because I don't think you could ever come to terms, but they help him to at least see that he has to find a purpose. He has to find some goal to go after. And there's a great quote that this person leaves us with. And he says, "I've learned two things." He said, "First, your loved ones may have left this earth, but they never leave your heart." And the one especially emphasizing for today's story, they will always be with you, or they will always be with you. And second, and this is part important for this message today. Second, I found the best way through pain and loss and grief is to find purpose. David, in this case, found purpose, and this story about this gentleman, he finds a purpose. He becomes he becomes a statesman, and he does a very good job, and really grows into his position in Congress, and does a lot of good things. He he found a purpose. He turned around. Now, believe it or not, his first purpose wasn't running for Congress. He freely admits that. His first purpose, he realized, was his two sons. They were the most important thing in his life, and that was the purpose that kept him going. He focused on that purpose, and that's where he went. And what we see in the scripture is David does the same thing. David finds a purpose, and the purpose at this point is that all hope is not lost. We can catch up to him, we can find them. And even if we can't catch them immediately, we will find our family members. Because they generally, if you're going to kill someone, you're going to kill them at the town. If you take them, you take them to enslave them. We're going to get our family back. And David finds a purpose, and he takes his men, and we can tell from just the way they talk. The Amalekites had a massive head start, and they catch up, and we can tell that they're moving fast because 200 of them become exhausted and can't go. And so they're left with the baggage, they're left with all this stuff, and that likely even boosts the speed at which David and the rest of his men can go because now they don't have to worry about the extra baggage. They can keep going and moving faster. And eventually they catch them unaware, and as it says, not one thing was missing. All of the family, the children, the livestock, the plunder, it's all there. And so with that driving fire, the driving purpose, they're able to get back. Now, they come back, and what we see here is within the group now we see a bit of a issue. 200 were so exhausted they couldn't keep going, so they made an agreement: stay here, watch the baggage. The other 400 went, they fought the battle, they won. Now that they're coming back, as David says, the evil men in his group start saying, well, these guys didn't fight the battle, they don't get plunder, they were too exhausted, they were the baggage, they don't count here. And what David says is no. It's just as important to watch the baggage as it is to fight the battle. And so no one will be out of the nobody will be left out, whether you're with the baggage or with there. And what that shows us is that regardless of what your purpose is in life, whatever your role is important, even if it's not being the leadership role, even if it's not being the top dog. Whatever it is we're doing, let's do it with a good purpose, and our purpose is important. Here's the kicker about this. Two things about the guys that were left with the baggage. One, by holding onto the baggage and guarding it, they were able to let the other people catch up faster and get there. We don't necessarily know if they could have got there in time unless they actually got rid of the baggage. And two, and this is really, really important as well. If someone would have left 200 people in Ziklag in the first place, instead of taking all the soldiers with them in battle, if they would have left someone with the women and children in the first place to guard it, they wouldn't have gotten captured in the first place. So that role, although it may be passive, well, it may be supportive, it's critical. And frankly, if they would have thought about that in the first place, they would have never had the chase down. They would have not had the trauma of almost losing all of their family and all their material possessions. And so whatever our role is, it is critical. And understand, even if you feel like you're in a supporting role, even if you feel like it's minor, it's major. Someone has to do it. And it's important that you do it as best you can. I want to leave you with a quote as we talk about purpose. Actually, one more point on purpose I forgot about. It also seems to me that we see that David, within this, starts to learn his purpose again about being the king of Israel. Because there's an interesting point at the end where he says, he starts giving gifts back to the leaders of Judah. Why does he start doing that? The only thing that I'm going to conclude here, and this is just purely me being the amateur history person that I am, if he starts sending gifts to Judah at this point, it's because he's remembered his original purpose was to be king of Israel. That's where he's called to be. And he knows that one of the closest places he's with is Judah. And so he's starting to build his base of support again for whenever it is time for him to be king. Because he knows that in this aimless period of time that he's had, this year and a half, he knows he's done damage. And something about this event shocks him into, I've got to fix this. And so we start seeing him send gifts to the people of Judah, to the leaders of Judah. And to me, this is him starting to retrace and rebuild this role of king of Israel. And so, again, he finds his purpose again. And so whatever our purpose is, whatever it is, we must go at it with as much fervor as David does. And within this, as we finish this today, there's a quote that as I was reading this and working on this devotional, there was a quote that kind of popped up, and I think it's a great one to finish with. And it's from Martin Luther King. It's one of my absolute favorite quotes that I've ever heard. And as it talks about purpose, I think this says it way better than I could ever say it. If a man is to be called a street sweeper, he should sweep streets even as Michelangelo painted, or Beethoven composed music, or Shakespeare wrote poetry. He should sweep streets so well that all the hosts of heaven and earth will pause to say, here lived a great street sweeper who did his job well. Let's pray. Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for all the moms in the world. Goodness knows, life wouldn't, life wouldn't exist with them. And frankly, during our day-to-day life, if we didn't have one by our side, I frankly think we would all cease to exist. I'm not sure we would be able to do it. Thank you for all the mothers out there, and just watch over them and bless them, and let us always make sure to show them the proper honor they deserve each and every day. Father, there's a lot of times where I think it's easy for us to be aimless, to find ourselves in an aimless position in life. Help us to always search out that purpose. Even in the depths of despair, in the worst of the worst, let us look for that purpose. Keep us focused on that purpose and help us to drive towards whatever that purpose it is you have for us in our lives, whatever your will is for us. Help us to drive ourselves to that, and to just to drive ourselves as best we can. Father, just be with us. Be with all the people out there who have needs. Be with Mr. Jeremy and Pastor Earl, and be with everyone out there right now who needs you. And just Wherever people are, help them to find that purpose. Show it to them. Shine it as a light on their way. And we ask for this in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, thank you guys. Again, by way of announcements, we are going to be back here again next Sunday at 10:45 for worship service in the morning, and then we will be doing this again at 6 p.m. Also, just by reminder for everybody out there, we are doing a spaghetti dinner on the 22nd. There is two ways to do it. There is a drive-through if you either can't stay, worried about COVID, whatever it is. You can go through the drive-through. All spaghetti meals are by donation only, and the recommendation or the suggestion is about $8. The proceeds are going to go to benefit Jeremy Gibson and to help him on his medical needs and all the needs that he and his family need right now. And then if you want to stay, I think you need to talk to Miss Donna Buell, and she can get you a ticket, I believe is how that works. And if I'm saying this wrong, someone please correct me in the comments later on. But what we need a ticket to do the in-person. So two ways to do it. Like I said, please come. Even if you can't, please make a donation. But I, like I said, hope you can at least go through the drive-through at some point. Just a reminder, I don't know the exact dates, and that's kind of sad because I was on the committee that helped set it up. We will be doing some fun summer activities coming up. So be kind of on the lookout for those announcements. I wish I had the dates, but I really messed up and kind of forgot them. I believe they start in June. Just forgive me. It's been a kind of chaotic couple of weeks. So have a great evening. Looking forward to talking to you next week as we start to really wrap up this book. And so actually next week, because we covered all of the chapters of David here that I wanted to chapter, we're going to turn back now. We're going to go back to the beginning of this battle, and we're going to talk about Saul and what's going on with him. So have a great evening. Have a great night. We will talk to you later. Bye, guys.